It has begun!
I'd like to discuss the difference between Vietnam veterans and World War II generations. Or, as I'm sure a lot of us have seen, it seemed the World War II generation came back a lot more intact than the Vietnam veterans. So why is that? Well, first you have to consider that these are two different generations. The World War II generation were born in the early to mid-20s to be able to go to war. Okay, which means they grew up in the 30s. What does that have to do with anything? Well, their parents, during their late childhood and through their teens, were living in the roaring 20s, where everyone had it good. Everything was sweet. Everyone was indulgent. So now that these people are having children, they have nothing via the Depression. So their acclimation from indulgence to nothing was too hard to cope with, and they took it out on their children. So from the time the World War II generation was born, they were beaten down with their parents' inability to emotionally cope, and were just raised in an endless atmosphere of nihilism. You're going to die any minute. You're going to starve to death. Nothing's going to work. So by the time these children, the World War II generation, got old enough to go to war, they were so nihilistic that boys as young as 12 were trying to lie to go to the war. Why? Because the futility and nihilism that they were bathed in from the time they were born. Because they thought, well, at least if I fight in the war, I'll be fighting for something and not nothing. If I win, we come home to spoils and a good life. If I die, I don't have to come home to this shithole. So the nihilism of the World War II generation is what carried them through the war, is what inspired them to fight in the war. Now, this is very different from the Vietnam generation. The Vietnam generation were boomers. They were born and grew up in the prosperity, the golden age of America. Okay? So they grew up very soft, very catered to, very optimistic in their reality. The polar opposite of their parents. And so when you send someone soft like that into war, they have a much harder time coping with it. Case in point, again, World War II generation, you had 12-year-old boys lying about their age to try to go fight in the war. In Vietnam, you had people lining up to try to dodge the draft. A very different set of circumstances. But also, the ones that went to World War II were already ready to die. Again, the nihilism. But this was before any of the Geneva Conventions. Okay? So in World War II, we could shoot first and ask questions later. Okay? We could be as nasty as we wanted to win, and that's why we won. When we went to Vietnam, all of that was rolled back. In fact, these already softer individuals that are forced to go to war, i.e. they didn't go on their own volition, they were told, once we drop you off, you have all the weapons, you have all the tactics, you have everything to wipe this out in a day. But you have to stand down and let the enemy kill you before you shoot back. So again, a complete inversion from kill first, ask questions later, win at all costs, to let the enemy wipe you out before you ever raise a finger against them, because it might look bad. And so these differences, if you will, raised in nihilism, raised in hope, excited to go to war to escape their life, terrified of going to war, allowed kill without thinking, not allowed to even defend themselves without being slaughtered first. There's so many differentials between these generations as to why the World War II generation came home, led a good life, maybe had a drink every day. The Vietnam generation ended up homeless and drugged out of their mind. And so I guess that is my short meandering on why there was such a difference in the functionality of World War II veterans and Vietnam veterans. Thanks for listening.
Is it over?